Somebody asked me the other day, hey, tell me about ESG bonds. And that's not really a thing.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today is February 9th, 2021. I'm Eric Planey.
Hello, I'm Lucas Finko.
And I'm Dana Villanova.
And together we are the Pirates of Clean Tech. Yar!
Yar, yar.
Well, it's nice to see that the days are getting longer. Dana is in Colorado, mountain time, so she has a little more light at this moment than we probably will at the end of this podcast. But welcome, everybody. This is episode number 4 of our third season already. Time is moving very quickly. Lucas and I were talking yesterday, and one thing we should do, we really want to just kind of acknowledge people who tragically passed away yesterday in India. I don't know if you've heard about this dam that collapsed, and reports that I read early on, the dam actually collapsed because a glacier in the Himalayan mountains collapsed, and an avalanche caused the penetration and collapse of the dam. And there was an article talking about how climate change is directly attributable to this horrible tragedy where many people have lost their lives. So we thought we should just kind of acknowledge that and, send our best to the people of that the village and that region and the workers of that hydroelectric facility some are still missing right now.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Eric. I'll actually jump in here. It was 2013. I had the privilege of going to India for a couple of weeks, and flight was canceled from Delhi to Kathmandu, and we were stuck in Delhi and ended up going north to a little town called Rishikesh, which is on that same river system. And luckily, it sounds like the flood didn't reach that town, which can be quite touristy and full. And it's on the banks of the Ganges, very sacred place. And so that really hit home. And it's really sad to see the effects of climate change affecting people in that region.
Well, part of the reason we're having this podcast is that we can make our small contribution to fighting climate change as best we can. And so many more people globally are jumping on board with us. So before we begin, we're trying to do our bar-friendly format. I got to give another shout out. Ober Creek Brewery in New Hamburg, Wappinger Falls, New York. I'm drinking the barrel-aged Elegance Farmhouse Ale. It is incredible. Totally recommend people in the Hudson Valley to check out this fantastic microbrew. What are you enjoying happy hour with right now?
Well, I am so grateful that you're giving a shout out to the Hudson Valley, because that's my hometown area. And I now live in Colorado. I'm only here 3 months. So I'm kind of missing New York, missing my family. And I went in a different direction. I'm not much of a beer drinker, but as a tribute to my Italian heritage, I'm drinking a Montepulciano.
Oh, that sounds very nice. Very nice on a winter.
Yeah, I'm drinking a Ommegang 3 Philosophers. It's out of Cooperstown, New York. Very good. Fermented and bottled. Very good stuff.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, Lucas, I think you're going to introduce our guest for today.
Yeah, sure. So, Dana, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your career background and how you ended up in ESG.
Yeah, sure. First of all, guys, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here and talk about green bonds, ESG. I'm wearing my green sweater, my one and only green sweater, to get in the spirit of the conversation. So my background, I majored in communications, not finance. My first job out of college was at a PR firm. And then just transitioned, and I ended up doing PR and marketing for a bank. Then I worked in kind of a back office role at a portfolio manager. And then one day a friend called me and said, she was a headhunter, and said, listen, I have this opportunity for you. It's to work on the trading floor for municipal bonds, but it's at Morgan Stanley, and if you get your foot in the door there, it'll change the course of your life. And sure enough, indeed it did. So I show up at Morgan Stanley at this huge trading floor. I'm in my early 20s. I have not the slightest clue what a coupon or yield or CUSIP was. And lo and behold, I've spent more than 15 years in municipal bond financing. So from Morgan Stanley, I went on to work in municipal bond insurance pre-financial crisis, when more than half the deals in the market would take insurance. So I was at MBIA, and then I transitioned to assured guarantee. And during that period of time, it had been about 12 years in bond insurance. I'm getting a little stagnant. I wanted to learn new things. I actually went in my personal life, I like to travel. So I went on a trip with Habitat for Humanity to Bali, Indonesia. And I started to learn that Habitat is actually a microfinancing organization. So I started studying microfinancing, and then started studying impact investing and sustainability. And I didn't really know where all this was going. And then one day I met a woman at a conference, and she had a background in environmental finance and consulting. And I had my background in kind of capital markets and deal origination. And together we formed Kestrel Verifiers. We were the only woman-owned green bond verifier in the world by the Climate Bonds Initiative. So I was the CEO and co-founder, COO, pardon me, and co-founder. And I kind of transitioned into green bonds, and now I'm at IHS Markit, and we can talk about that also. But it's funny where our paths take us. Like, no kid in the history of the world has ever said, I want to be a muni bonds when I grow up. It never happened with any high school guidance counselor. But 15 years later, I really love this industry, and you can really see the tangible results of your work. Yeah, I drive down the highway here in Colorado Springs and I see a power plant. We can talk about that later, or a sewer system, or a school, or it's really fun industry, and it's been a good road.
Oh yeah. So can we keep going on that? What is your role now at IHS Markit, and how are you involved with ESG?
Yeah, sure. So at IHS, the company is vast. I've been learning about all these different groups that do things vastly different than what I do, but I'm a part of the global markets group, and we cover equities, munis, fixed income, and we operate the deal origination systems that all new issue transactions have to go through our systems. And in the municipal bond space, it's pretty much every deal of the market. So about 55,000 issuers in the United States for US municipalities, and about 10,000 of them a year, 10, 12, bring deals to the market every year. So those deals have to come through our system. And part of my job was to enhance our platforms with different tags and labels, making sure green deals are labeled properly when they enter the market, and just combining ESG initiatives that are going on around the firm. So some of my counterparts in different departments in IHS are in like the clean energy technology group, and that's kind of a global market intelligence provider. They have so many data and statistics on solar, wind, battery, renewables, the largest dedicated solar project database globally, with more than 100,000 projects that they're looking into. IHS offers a wide range of ESG solutions, and we're trying to bring that together for the global markets group.
Yeah, first that's a good segue. I want to give a quick shout out to my hometown Ohio friend Rob Boyle, who introduced me to you, Dana, and what a great connection, because I think what you do is so relevant for many of our listeners. And that's a good segue into the big question that so many people still don't have clarity on, because it's such a wide definition. But many people hear about ESG, and ESG was such a buzzword even before the COVID pandemic kind of took over the news. So tell us a little bit about what you feel and see. What is ESG for you?
Sure. It is a big overarching topic that is often confused and misused in the improper context. Somebody asked me the other day, hey, tell me about ESG bonds. And that's not really a thing. ESG are attributes that could be applied to many different asset classes. So E, environmental, social, and governance, E, S, and G. So we can talk about the first example in terms of like a corporation. So for example, I was at Assured Guarantee or Morgan Stanley. How well is that corporation managing its environmental, social, and governance issues in general? So is the corporation addressing things like climate change? Are they using renewable energy on their office buildings? When it comes to social, How is the company's relationship with their employees? If they're in a manufacturing type of company, are they using fair wages, and are they responding to human rights issues, and are they involved with their community, social? And then when it comes to governance, you're talking about the board or the leadership. What does executive compensation look like? What does board diversity look like? Not just male, female, but ethnic diversity. How effective is the board? Have they had corruption issues? Are there any underlying issues when it comes to the governance? So that's relatable on the subject of a corporation. And that's where ESG kind of scoring. There's companies that score other companies on their ESG. But on the municipal bond level, I think of it on two levels. So I think of it on the issuer level. So I'm a native New Yorker, but I'm in Colorado Springs now. So Colorado Springs, how do we compare to other cities, like who's near us in demographics, like Kansas City, Omaha, Raleigh? Like, how well are those cities doing on their E, S, and G? And then on a deeper level, or the next level down, if those cities issue bonds, are those bonds green bonds, or are those bonds just kind of regular city activities? They have to pave roads and do regular things. So there's not much of an ESG impact on just regular general obligation bonds, but where the bond might be a green bond, there could be, better ESG scores, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And definitely, it seems like there's still a lot of latitude in how people define ESG, but there needs to be a tangible or very transparent effort and a focused effort for that particular company or issuer to really show that they're making strides forward in addressing the E, S, and G, the three issues that surround ESG. So, and kind of that's another good segue to the next question I wanted to bring up, which is we talk about ESG, we have some clarity about that. There's a big umbrella, word or phrase out there called green bonds. And a lot of people think that's just one type of product, but actually there's a lot of different products out there. And I thought maybe if you can do a very quick overview of just what are the different definitions within green bonds and the different mechanisms, and how do they interact with each other?
Yeah, great points, Eric. I've definitely green bonds is sort of the common phrase that everybody refers to as a catch-all, but we're actually referring to different types of labels and designations within the umbrella term of green bonds. So we could get really wrapped up into taxonomies and frameworks and the EU framework versus others, but I'm going to try to keep it really simple here. So the basic labels that I commonly refer to and see in the US muni space are the labels that come from the ICMA, the International Capital Markets Association. So they've written the green bond principles, the social bond principles, and the sustainability bond guidelines. And I'll get into each one of those. And then there's also the Climate Bond Initiative. They've written the taxonomy on certified climate bonds, like what a transaction takes to achieve that level. And to me, it's kind of a higher level of a green bond because they're trying to achieve higher metrics that actually combat and align with the Paris Climate Accord and combat the 2-degree warming trend. So then we get into other labels that don't even really have hard rules written around yet or frameworks. So there's blue bonds, there's transition bonds, and there's a couple different type of sustainability bonds. I'll go through these really, really quickly. So here's an example of an ICMA green bond. You could be talking about energy efficiency upgrades on a building, renewable energy installation like solar on a building, clean transportation, green buildings in general. Those are green bonds, ICMA green. Social bonds, what we're talking about is like bonds that have a social benefit component. So affordable housing, sustainable food systems, bonds that advance socioeconomic developments. And it has to reach target populations. That's the key thing about social bonds. And then per the ICMA, green plus social equals sustainability bond. So think of something like public housing or affordable housing. So the building itself is going to be built to green certified standards, energy efficiency, that sort of stuff on the building structure itself, but that it also provides a social benefit to a target population. So that would be an example of a sustainability bond for the ICMA. A couple other types I'll get really quick. Sustainability linked bonds. These are becoming more popular because they're almost like a transition bond where, and I should also mention on those previous labels, the entire use of proceeds has to go toward that activity. It cannot be partial, it has to be all of the use of proceeds toward that activity. Whereas sustainability linked bonds are companies that are kind of trying to get better. So they might not be using 100% of the proceeds toward, green or sustainable activities, but they're setting out, they're called KPI, key performance indicators. They're setting out their metrics and saying, we are going to reach these targets by a certain period of time. And if we don't, we're actually going to offer a step up coupon payment to investors if we don't meet our metrics. So those are sustainability linked bonds. There's also sustainable development goal linked bonds. So these touch upon the UN 17 SDGs, if you're familiar with those. It's like poverty, hunger, healthcare, these 17 markers that these try to achieve. And then bonds issued directly by the World Bank to benefit member countries are called sustainable development bonds. And those have been used recently to combat COVID issues. So the World Bank will issue a giant issue and then disperse those funds to their member countries to set up healthcare facilities, testing facilities, COVID related healthcare infrastructure.
Wow, there's really a lot out there in that universe, and investors have more and more of kind of a menu of choices that kind of fit what their investing profile would be, I suspect. So it seems like the market is becoming more, not maybe mature, but there's just a lot more out there for investors to really decide what matches their profile.
Yeah, for sure. I think a big takeaway from all this, you can get into all of those definitions and it feels very overwhelming. But I think the message that I'm seeing more and more is for the history of bond analysis or just financial analysis in general, it was all about how is this going to get paid back? The security paragraph within an offering statement talks about how is this going to get paid back? And that's what ratings are based on. That's what all credit analysis was typically based on. How is this getting paid back? But now we're shifting and we're seeing investors ask more and more, what is this bond being used for? So the use of proceeds paragraph is becoming just as important as the security paragraph.
Okay, I'm the guy that always has to grab the lightning rod. So let's talk about greenwashing. I think we all know it's out there. So is it still out there? Are there some side effects that you could tell us about, or how's it being rectified? What's going on there?
Yeah, that's great, Lucas. When I think about greenwashing, I kind of laid out 3 levels. There's greenwashing when it comes to like the products that we see on shelves and the stores that we choose to shop in. So when you see labeling on, like, I use the example of water bottles, single-use plastics are one of the worst offenders out there. And you'll see, labeling that says, oh, this bottle is manufactured with 30% less plastic. Okay, well, that's great, but still 1 million bottles per minute are consumed and 700,000 per minute are not recycled. So there's like consumer greenwashing, and I think that's going to still happen. And we just need to be mindful of that when we make our choices as consumers. Number 2 is the greenness of the investments that we choose to put our money into. So I personally just went on to my TD Ameritrade account, tried to look for green funds. If I wanted to invest in a green fund right now, and I'm in finance, how do I know that's what's in that fund is truly green? So rules are coalescing around that. The European Commission is introducing rules for asset managers on, what the terms should be for environmental, social, and governance disclosures. They're providing a taxonomy to provide, clear legal definitions on what is actually sustainable. And so this will help to combat greenwashing when it comes to investing. And then on the bond level, back to my universe of muni bonds, I described, the city issuer level, Colorado Springs versus, Kansas City. But on the bond level itself, Series A within an offering document could be just regular general obligation bonds. Series B is labeled green bonds. Well, did they self-label that? That is still allowed here in the US, or did they hire a verifier? Did that verifier write a second party opinion? Just looking on the cover of offering statements for those logos by the ICMA or the Climate Bonds Initiative helps to reassure investors that what they're investing in truly is green and not greenwashing.
Wow. Dana, you touched on something early in that answer that kind of strikes really, really thoroughly at Lucas and I. One of the reasons we set up this podcast is we really want to find solutions for the average citizen to really feel they are contributing and participating in the green revolution. And we know that's not very easy. And you kind of mentioned the TD Ameritrade account, like hunting for green bonds and green funds yourself. Talk a little bit about, are we going to get better in this country in terms of accessibility of green investing for the average person? And what are your thoughts on how that could happen?
That is a great question. And I think, yes, all signs point to yes. Within different investing platforms for individual investors, they're adding screeners and tools on the screen so that I could search better. And someone like my grandma, like how my grandma wants to put her money to use on quote unquote good things. How does she do that? Well, one easy way is she can reach out to her financial advisor, her financial professional, and say, these are the things I want to be invested in. These are things I do not, and exclusionary practices were kind of the early forms of this. So, somebody going into their own account or approaching their FA and saying, I do not want to be invested in things like, firearms or mining or fossil fuels. Exclusionary is easier. Inclusionary, finding the things that you care about is a little harder. But in the muni world, I'm going to use a great example we saw last year. The Connecticut Green Bank issued green Liberty bonds, and they purposely named them Liberty bonds to evoke a sense of, the past. After the World War I and II, they were issuing war bonds. They were calling them Liberty bonds, and they were kind of advertising them as like, this is a patriotic thing to do, like invest in your country. And so I love that kind of, flashback to that era and getting people engaged in socially conscious green activities right in their local communities. So what the Green Bank did was really, really great. They actually lowered the denomination value, the amount that is required to invest. Typical denominations are $5,000. They lowered that to $1,000. They did a very grassroots campaign effort, and they gave first priority to citizens of Connecticut to be to put in their orders for this deal. And for the first, I believe it was a $16 million deal, and 5 million of that were filled with the local, local citizen orders before the national institutional order. So I think that was a great way for an issuer to directly reach their local community.
Was that perceived to be such a success that other green banks in different states will probably follow suit?
We hope so. I haven't seen one on the forward calendar yet, but I definitely see these trends catching on where issuers in general are going for green labels versus not. I could tell you a story about Boston, but we hope to see more of this for sure.
Wow. So I guess maybe the last question that we thought we would touch on is, there seems to be a voracious appetite for investors to invest in green bonds in the different categories you mentioned. Talk a little bit about supply and demand right now. I mean, are we getting to where we need to be in terms of supply, given the fact that we now have all these safeguards in place to let investors know that they're truly investing in something that's green? How can we get the supply ramped up? Because it seems like the demand is certainly there.
Yeah, that's a great point. So just a couple weeks ago, Sean Kidney, who's the CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative, kind of wrote the rules on climate bonds, was on a podcast with the bond buyer. And he said, and I quote, "The depth of demand is unbelievable. We could place 10 trillion tomorrow if we had it. We simply don't have it." And he went on to say, we have investors banging on our doors saying, give us more product. Where is it?
Wow.
So the demand is certainly there. All analysis points to the trend of increasing supply. But what we found in the municipal market is, like I said, about 10, 11,000 deals come per year. A lot of times these issuers don't even realize that their deals qualify for the ICMA labels just inherently. If they're updating, HVAC systems in their buildings, that counts. If they're putting solar on, there's a great story of a school district who's, great side story. This school district in Minnesota, their students were learning about solar and renewable energy, and they got so impassioned about this that they petitioned the school board that they want to put solar on all their schools. And the school board said yes, and they issued bonds and did this. So the issuer themselves can be aware that they are, qualify as a green deal, but sometimes they're not even aware. So IHS Markit has partnered with a climate bonds initiative verifier, and we look at the forward calendar. The deals that are coming up in the municipal market all have to issue a preliminary official statement. It states what the use of proceeds is going to be spent on. There's enough documentation there for the verifier to do their analysis and determine if it meets the labels for green, social, or sustainability. And then they go back to the issuer and say, hey, did you know that you qualify for this already? And then we give the option to the underwriters who are bringing these deals into the market through our platform, and giving them the option on the day of sale to add that label and then be able to market it to the buyers as a green deal. So we're literally creating supply where there previously wasn't, or I should say, where they were unaware that they were green. We're creating green supply to meet the demands in the market.
Wow. So those are school children, you said, in Minnesota that actually kind of pressured the system, the administrators, to put solar panels on the roof of the schools, and it actually happened, and they issued a bond for it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like beyond incredible. I guess, it makes me want to ask you this question, because you talked about your career in the beginning, which was really in this incredible story of luck and circumstance and drive and initiative. We found out over the holidays that many of the people who listen to this podcast are really in their 20s or just starting their career. And we're happy to say that 60% of our listeners are women. And so I think it's really worth asking you, what advice would you give people who are just starting in their careers or thinking about trying to do something in green finance? What would be the avenue that they can take?
That's great to hear, Eric. And more I'm being invited to panels. There's women in clean tech and sustainability. So I'm really always happy to hear when more women are entering this field of finance and green energy, green and technology. So I would just encourage people to follow where your interests are. I didn't know where this was going for me, but I'm sitting at my desk, I'm wanting to learn more. I signed up for courses online. So a great resource to me was Coursera. I was just browsing their course list, and they are really low cost. It's not a fully committed, MBA or, expensive program to get into. It's like $50 a month, and you can take, a variety of courses from accredited universities. So I sat at my desk and I took corporate responsibility and sustainability strategies from UNC Wilmington. And there's a real professor, and there were, assignments, and I got a certificate at the end. And I also took business strategy for social impact from University of Pennsylvania, and same thing, got a nice, paper certificate at the end for very low cost. And so I feel that something that helped me was not only just gaining that knowledge and learning about things I didn't know before, but having those keywords on your resume and on your LinkedIn, and using networking and different association affiliations to have keywords on your resume. So another thing that I did early on in my career was get involved in as many industry organizations as you can. Sadly, things are virtual right now, but on the other hand, it's not intimidating to walk into a room full of people where you don't know anybody. If you want to listen to a panel or hear a speaker, everything's virtual right now. So maybe takes away that intimidation factor and allows people to get involved in things. So I was on the board of the Municipal Bond Club of New York. That's been around since 1932. I'm currently on the board of the Municipal Bond Women's Forum. When I was in New York, I used to attend, it was called the Microfinancing Club of New York, and they've since changed their name to the Impact Capital Forum, and I love to listen to their panels. So just, listen, follow your passions, try to learn about new things, and sometimes you don't know where either those keywords take you or those connections take you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I love those online classes that you can take that don't obligate you for 2 years, but there's something that it piques your interest. You feel good. It validates. I mean, that's how I got to meet Lucas Finko, was through this whirlwind 1 semester program at NYU, and it ended up being one of the best things I've ever done in my life. So, Lucas, anything else you want to ask?
No, it was great. It was great having Dana on, and a lot of interesting insight into the ESG world. So that was really cool. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
And I think Dana agreed that she'll stick around as we go transition into our articles. And, promise we won't get too technical because we never really do. But I think we have some good ones teed up for this week. So Dana, are you going to stick around with us?
Yeah, I'm all for it. I should have said up front that I'm really not a clean energy specialist, so I might not have a lot to add on all of these articles, but a couple of them are very relatable to the muni world. So thanks for continuing to have me here.
Yeah, well, you know what? We're not experts ourselves. We just try to be. So, we figured we get away with it half the time. Half the time we get called out by people. So it's a conversation stimulator. Lucas, who's up first?
You're up first, Eric.
Oh, a lot of pressure. I actually wrote notes down on some of these articles because I thought they were so good. Ooh. So this one is from Quartz, which we actually don't use a lot in terms of referencing for articles. Their website is qz.com, not quartz.com. And I found this one really fascinating. This article is from Tim McDonald on February 4th, and it's called "Biden Could Prove That Solyndra Scandal Wasn't a Failure." And I really like this article because everybody knows, and they talk about Solyndra. And Tim in his article references a young lady who was an intern at DOE named Nina Eichinger, who was kind of going through and kind of in the early stages of the Department of Energy's loan fund. That was this massive congressionally authorized program to really get money in the hands of startup companies in order for the US to kind of go back to being that savvy risk taker that we were. And Nina ended up being, I think now she's an economist at the University of Rhode Island, I believe. But what's really interesting is this loan program by the DOE that started about a decade ago really got a black eye because one particular company named Solyndra received, I think, $535 million in loans on creation, where the proceeds were supposed to be used to create a silicon-free solar panel, which silicon, of course, is a precious material. Going with the silicon-free solar panel would be great. Unfortunately, given a kind of a macroeconomic change in the market where solar panels coming from China were so much cheaper, that Solyndra can never get to where they need to be, so they went bankrupt. Yeah. And politics went into play, and a lot of congressional Republicans use that as saying, we're not in the business of a government of being a bank. We shouldn't be kind of taking these types of risks. What I love about this article is it talks about the fact that another startup company in the electric vehicle space also received a significant loan. Their name happens to be Tesla. And as a result of that, Tesla skyrocketed and really became the catalyst for every OEM out there to create electric vehicles right now. Really good article. Talks about the fact that there's still $44 billion in dry powder that has been authorized by Congress to be used, and that the Biden administration should take that leap and start getting back into the game. And me personally, we've talked about this on the show, on the podcast. There's so many good manufacturing and technology companies out there that are selling products and services to older industries that can easily make the transition into clean energy with just a little bit of research boost. And these types of programs allow that to happen. So I love the story that was brought out. Love the fact that Solyndra should not be looked at as a black eye. And the one thing that I also inferred from this article is that a lot of times technologies fail in its first utilization, but that research doesn't go to waste and it comes back later on in life in some sort of other technology platform. And I think Solyndra could possibly be that. I think a lot of other companies that receive the benefit of this federal program would also be in a position where they can really develop some great technology for clean energy going forward. So let's kick it off with our guest, Dana. What did you think about the article?
I mean, this is fascinating. Like you said, I mean, I don't know the statistics, but something like, 50% of all startups fail, right? But like you said, the knowledge that you gain even out of failing sometimes is beneficial to the industry as a whole. So really fascinating story. I would just transition this, back to munis real quick, but and the Biden administration has a very strong plan for Build Back Better, where it's all about state aid to local, aid to state and local government, talking about, building sustainable infrastructure, clean energy. So while it might not be in the form of loans per se, I think this administration is really committed to seeing, sustainable, clean, green economy flourish under their administration.
Yep, agreed. Lucas?
Yeah, some of these numbers are just shocking. I mean, the $44 billion just sitting there not being used by the former administration is just shocking. And this goes back to the supply and demand we talked about, right? The demand is out there. We got to get this moving. There's some other interesting things here too. So since fiscal year 2016, no project has missed a payment. So this is the problem with anecdotal evidence, right? You can't take one anecdote and say, oh, I know everything because I heard this one story about Solyndra. The majority of the project has been good. It's expected to generate at least $5 billion in interest for taxpayers. Okay, you go find a government program and let me know that actually pays the taxpayer $5 billion. I've never seen anything like this. So I don't know how you cannot be excited and get behind this. Hopefully Biden can get this moving again and we'll do some amazing things with taxpayer money and we'll do a good job with it. So really cool.
Yeah, good point. Let me ask, end with a couple other stats on this. The default ratio of the program so far has been 2%. And as somebody in the banking industry, 2% default ratio on a portfolio is quite sound, especially for the technology risks that these companies in particular are taking.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the risk reward aspect of it is really in favor of the investor, and the investor happens to be the U.S. taxpayer here. 35 projects, I think, have been financed. A couple categories: wind, solar farms, EVs, a chemical plant that has new carbon capture technology. I mean, this is the type of stuff that will just really propel our mission of getting down to 2050, 2 degrees centigrade capture by 2050. So we definitely need to stay on this. So great article. Let's call Solyndra what it was, which is a blip in an otherwise fantastic program.
Yeah.
I want to add one other point, if I may. I totally agree with you guys. I think it's super exciting. And where I see this in the capital markets is there's kind of a disconnect. We kind of touched upon this between like academia and all these rules and taxonomies. And then how do you get these into the hands of actual investors to do good? And in the muni world, under the Obama administration, there were Build America bonds where they used, federal tax credits and subsidies to align issuers and investors' motives. So if you're going to issue something that is doing good, you should get a credit for that. And if you're going to invest in something that's quote unquote doing good, you should get a credit for that. So aligning issuers with investors in the form of a financial incentive, I think is really exciting. To see that there's this much money sitting on the sidelines waiting to be put to work is a great story.
Totally. I think we nailed it. So let's move on to our next one. Great contribution by both of you, Dana and Lucas. This one is from Clean Technica, because I keep saying it wrong. Lucas never calls me out. Lucas actually calls another publication wrong. We won't bring that up right now. So we're getting better at these things. Great article. First off, beautiful cover photo of Tesla Model Y and the Ford Mustang Mach-E electric vehicles. This is a must-read story, and I really recommend people to click on the link with our podcast, this story. What's next for state climate action in the U.S.? 7 areas to watch. This was published, I think, what day was it? It says 3 days ago. So I think just last week. This is actually a blog post by WRI, which I believe is World Resource Institute, by Saha, Sears, and Rude. This really talks about programs that are already in place effectively to move the needle on states to actually take, climate change and climate action under their own mandates and to do something while they're waiting for new federal legislation and incentives. And so the reason why I say this is because there's 7 key areas they talk about, but each key area itself has 3 or 4 points underneath it. So it's really a comprehensive piece, and I'm probably not going to do it justice, but let me rattle off some of the 7 points and then give a quick wrap up. Number 1, 7 states plus Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico want to be 100% clean by 2050. I know Lucas has some issues with being 100% clean, but nonetheless, it's a target that they're trying to get towards. And they're talking about using existing mechanisms. Department of Energy R&D programs, like we said, federal loans, empowering the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which we had Neil Chatterjee as a guest 2 weeks ago, to really work on interstate issues, and also using existing Clean Air Act legislation to really help states to get to where they want to do, where they need to be. Number 2, they really want to drive zero emission incentives. We know states like Colorado that we follow very well because some of our friends, Dana, are really working on really incentivizing people and companies and fleets to go zero emission. And that seems to be in place, and people are starting to get there. Again, the Biden administration can help accelerate that with certain types of incentives that help states and governments and even companies. Number 3, I think we're talking about deep decarbonization of buildings. We've talked about it ad nauseum on other parts of the show. Commercial buildings are such a large contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. We don't talk about it because you don't see the tailpipe like you do with a current ICE engine vehicle, but there's a lot of carbon contribution. So greening buildings is a low-hanging fruit way to create sustainable targets to get to where we need to by 2050. Include natural and working lands in climate change strategies. Again, this is a really good one. Just talking about, using our lands and promoting conservation, restoration, and land management. I'm a big fan of the Trillion Tree program that we've talked about. Number 5, adopt or expand carbon pricing programs. Again, they bring up our good friends at FERC. And, Neil Chatterjee was very explicit about the fact that he's a believer in carbon pricing as a mechanism to get to where we need to. And, they're talking about some things that are going to take place in order for us to get there. Number 6, leverage purchasing power to support low carbon technologies. This again, we talk about concrete and steel. Concrete is probably one of the dirtiest ways and largest carbon contributors because it's such an energy intensive process. And so the energy that goes into it has not been green traditionally. So other states are already considering policies that are kind of best practices out there for carbon incentives, clean carbon incentives. So all states should take a look at that. And I believe there's one more. And I wish this wasn't number 7 because I feel like it was kind of an afterthought and it should not be. But promoting equality and looking really at addressing air pollution hotspots. We know from talking about COVID how there's really disparity between richer, wealthier areas in the United States and inner cities. So pollution hotspots tend to be in inner cities where there's already an inequality from an economic standpoint. So, just using green energy as a way to kind of raise awareness and to bring up social equity is very, very important. I'm sure they didn't mean this to be the last point, but I think it's a crucial point. So again, I went through this very quickly because there's a lot of ground to cover. I think it's a great story for people to really spend a little bit of time reading on. So Lucas, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is great. I totally agree with pretty much all of this. We talked one of our very early episodes about Washington State. Washington State is blessed with plentiful clean energy, as is, Arizona, California. So I think Washington State's already 80% clean. So getting to 100% is not very hard for them. And in fact, I'll be looking for them to get to 120% so they can export some of that clean energy to other states that might not have it. So I really like this article. It's really, they have some good graphs in here. So if you're not watching on YouTube, you can go to the link, which we'll provide, and check out the graphs. Yeah, it seems like a really good and comprehensive article.
Yep. Dana, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they touch upon so many issues. Each one of these could be a story in and of itself, but two of the things that stand out to me is the number two item, which was about or was it 3 states that are trying to go to more renewables. So again, brand new to Colorado Springs. I'm driving from Denver down south, and you come across this beautiful cityscape. You have the Rocky Mountains to the west, and right in the middle of downtown. Now I'm brand new. This is my first view of the city across the, skyline. There's like a giant factory or something with smokestacks and, industrial looking right in the middle of downtown. Like, what is that? Is that like a factory? I had no idea, but it's a coal burning, electricity plant. I was shocked. I'm like, I just had a different perception. And again, not an energy expert. I'm showing my true colors here. But to see a coal burning electricity plant in the middle of a downtown was pretty shocking to me. The good news is they have plans by 2025 to decommission that and to actually change it over to natural gas, I believe. I could be confusing two plants, so somebody feel free to fact check me. But that's another kind of, back to the point of greenwashing, is natural gas. I mean, it's cleaner than coal in some sense, but it also supports fracking. So it's like, it's a better transition, put it that way. And then I also like number 7, the last one, where you're talking about, cities, and this gets into ESG a little bit. And I didn't really go into too much depth on ESG, but there's so many components that you can layer into the ESG story. So when you're looking at, one municipality versus another, and you're talking about, the quality of life, not just the governance and the social, but environment, but like, what's the actual quality of life? And how do you measure that as an investment when you're comparing 2 cities or 2 municipalities? So things like pollution, crime, obesity rates, diabetes rates, if you're looking at a school district, graduation rates, exposure to former toxic sites where the soil or water could have pollution issues still. There's so much here in this article, and this was a great find. It really raises a lot of good points, and hopefully a lot will be addressed in the coming years.
It just makes me like kind of like the Super Bowl's advertisement by General Motors. I just feel like we need to like look at Norway. I feel like everything in ESG is answered by a country like Norway. Now, obviously, they don't have kind of the racial melting pot that we do in this country. So that's probably, part of it historically has contributed to some of the inequality. But I feel that, just really addressing some of these issues in the context of bettering society from health and well-being standpoints is really a way to tackle so many issues. So I totally agree, Dana. All right. So speaking of Scandinavia, I got one more story. This is my fun story because this is like James Bond, evil adversary, cool. But this is out of Yale has a really nice publication called Yale Environment 360. The website is e360.yale.edu. This is from February 5th, and it's called Denmark is Building an Artificial Island as a Clean Energy Hub. And I mean, this is just simply incredible, but literally they're mandated to do this. It's a $34 billion project. It's the size of 8 football fields. And it's going to create enough power for 3 million households. And it's going to be a combination of being an energy storage apparatus for offshore wind. It's going to be, as we've been talking about time and time again, it's going to have the capacity to generate green hydrogen for use in shipping, aviation, and I believe maritime industry. So, it's possible that ships can actually pull up at almost like a gas station, and they're going to get their green hydrogen fill from electricity that was generated from offshore wind. It's just really incredible. I think there was a 3 to 10 gigawatts. I think this will be initial capacity of 3 gigawatts, but they want to grow it to 10 gigawatts, and they expect this to be operational in 2033. And, the key takeaway is not only is this a great project for Denmark, but think about how many spots in the United States where this would be ideal. Obviously New York, New Jersey is going down the path of offshore wind. If you think about that right at that intersection just south of Staten Island, there's already a lot of oil refining capacity. Wouldn't this be a perfect spot to have a similar island that can replace, oil refineries, maritime fuels, electricity generation, energy storage, the Great Lakes, the Pacific Northwest. There's so many areas where an idea like this can be emulated and replicated. And it's just one of those great like technology, big think projects that we need more of. And I think we're starting to get there as a country. Dana, I think you're first this time.
Again, not my area of expertise, but absolutely fascinating. I mean, if this is successful, it could serve as a model for the entire world. Like put this in every shipping channel, near every continent, and who knows how much diesel and fossil fuel you've saved in the shipping industry alone. Really fascinating. Great article to keep an eye on and see how this technology develops.
Lucas?
Yeah, this is great. This is what we've been talking about, right? So seeing it actually being done is super, super cool. I just hope they don't build it and they don't come, right? Remember Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. So they should really pair this with some mandates to make sure that these boats show up. We should be mandating hydrogen consumption on shipping vessels. So that's an interesting policy aspect of this too. So really cool to see. Thanks for bringing this up.
I feel like we need a road trip to go see this thing in construction, right? So
yeah,
once we get budget money for our pirate ship, then we're gonna load up all our former guests and Dana, and we're going out.
Perfect.
Cross Atlantic. Yeah, we'll do an Atlantic crossing, sail and hydrogen powered, and then fill up and come back, right?
Yeah, or we can use rum power if that's even possible. All right, Lucas, I think you're next, right?
Am I next? Okay.
You're next.
Okay, so, and actually I'm guilty of this also more so than Eric. I mean, we are a clean tech podcast, and I feel like I never talk about clean tech. I just talk about utility policy and stuff like that. So I thought I'd go back to our roots and talk about some clean tech. So I saw some articles about direct air capture. So I went to the source. This is IEA, that's the International Energy Association. They have a comprehensive article on direct air capture. So we'll provide the link. So this is a carbon capture and sequestration technology. These are technologies that directly pull carbon from the air. They're not mounted on like a smokestack or anything of that sort. And so they just have a real base kind of educational report about what it is, how it works, and how much of it we have. Sadly, this is like the world's saddest graph I've ever seen. It's really been hugging zero for many, many years. And now finally in 2023, we're forecast to be finally pulling megatons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. And look, there's a projection for 2030, about 10 megatons of CO2. That's probably per year. This is their scenario. So what is direct capture? Right, it's just pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. There's two main technologies. There's a liquid system which uses a chemical solution like hydroxide, and that removes the air. And then there's a solid solution that's also kind of a chemical solid absorbent. And then when you heat those, you can release the CO2. So you would do that in a different area. So you would pull it out of the atmosphere, and then you would release it into something where you could either turn it into a saleable product, which is what a lot of these companies do right now. They compress it and they put it into cans, and they sell compressed CO2, say for making your soda bubbly. So you may be consuming CO2 that got pulled out of the air when you drink your cola, or some other uses, industrial uses. So it's very interesting if you want to read through this. Sadly, there's very few implementations already deployed, but there are some that are operating. Cost ranges typically from $100 to $1,000 US dollars per ton. I'd really like to see it on the lower end of that, where it gets more realistic. I think we've been talking about carbon taxes beginning at kind of $40 a ton. So I would ideally want to get, carbon taxes in line with carbon sequestration. And then we have the ideal setup where we can pull that carbon back out that's being put in by non-sustainable sources. So there is a company that's doing it called Carbon Engineering. They claim their capture costs are between 94 and 232, depending on financial assumptions, energy costs, and specific plant configuration. So I'm assuming that means your output. So there is a lot more good news in here. There's one in Iceland called the Carbon Fix Project. It's currently capturing CO2 from the atmosphere, blending it with CO2 captured from geothermal fluids, and they're injecting it underground into basalt rock formations. So at first it sounds like, okay, great, you're just pumping gas underground. But the cool part is check this out. Within a couple of years, it gets sequestered through mineralization, so it turns into carbon minerals underground. So that's fantastic.
Wow.
That's what sequestration is all about. You want to put it down, then you want to keep it down there. You don't want to come back up.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is overwhelmingly interesting. There's so much to digest here. I'm going to refer to about a year ago. I think I watched an episode at Nova on PBS about, can we get to where we need to on carbon capture?
Yeah.
And there are so many incredible technologies that are being contemplated. So many of them are massive. I mean, imagine, like, I think in Switzerland, we're talking about a Hoover vacuum that's like the size of a city that would just pull out of the air. And the one thing that I think about, and you touched on it about the pricing per ton, is, if we spend all this money, is it really going to be an effective way of utilizing capital? I go back to that all the time. We really need to get these prices down, I think, for something to be truly generating a positive return for society. So I worry about that. I know we have to take on some of these projects in order to test and validate whether we can get down there in pricing. And last thing I'll say really quick is, Mother Nature gave us the greatest carbon capture vehicle, and that's a tree. And that's why I keep going back to the Trillion Tree Program to supplement everything else we're doing in clean technology incubation. So, Dana?
Mother Nature also gave us a great carbon product, diamonds. JK, just kidding, guys. No, I think this is an amazing article and reminds me of a news story out this week, which I first thought was another one of Elon Musk's kind of fantastical journeys, but actually it sounds like it really is coming to fruition. So Elon Musk has pledged $100 million toward a carbon removal competition. And this is happening. The full competition guidelines will be published on April 22nd. Winners will have to demonstrate a solution that can pull carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere or oceans and lock it away permanently in an environmentally benign way. So his aim is to be carbon negative, not just carbon neutral. So,
Awesome.
Locking it away in a benign way, I have an idea of what to do with all that carbon, but
Diamonds are forever, right?
diamonds are a girl's best friend. What can I say?
I still feel like we have a James Bond theme going on here. I love it. Great story, Lucas. A lot here.
Awesome. Okay. So my other clean tech story, this one actually came from a listener. So feel free to reach out to us and give us stories. This one came from my friend Sebastian, who listens to the show. This one from The Guardian. This is, let's see, from February 1st via the Australian Associated Press. Remote Tasmanian island to be powered by blowhole energy that harnesses waves. So I don't know if people know, I think Tasmania is a small island off the south of Australia, and they've committed to be 100% clean energy like some of our states have. And they even want to overproduce clean energy and pump it back to Australia. They're going to run a transmission line. So really cool to see this really neat technology. I don't know if you guys have thought about this, but wave and tidal energy is actually really hard if you think about it. Like a wave, how are you going to extract the energy out of a wave? Okay, we can put like a piece of plywood and then the waves move it back and forth. Well, how do you turn that into reciprocating energy? Like a generator. So it requires some kind of engineering. So this one's great. They're using the concept of a blowhole so that, like, if the wave hits, it'll funnel up and it'll actually gain acceleration. So you get a very powerful stream of force into this device. Really interesting. I wanted to see this, and it's actually been built. So you can go on, you can watch the video. They actually have this. The company's called Waveswell. They've actually built one, and it's moving out and being deployed as we speak. This was their progress report, January 2021. This was last month, and it shows, if you watch the video, you go on the link we'll provide. You can see them actually going out to their site where they're going to generate power. And so it says it can generate up to 200 kilowatts of power. They have plans for a 1 megawatt model. This is just awesome. I wanted to bring this up. I'd love to see more innovation like this. I suggest you go watch the video. It's super cool to see this thing built and deployed. Congrats on this. Yeah. Eric, what do you think?
Well, let's go to Dana first. I think ladies first on this one.
All right.
I think, like you said, Lucas, I'm certainly no expert in this area, but this technology has tried to emerge in with rivers, with, the force of river flow. It's kind of like a hydrogen, electricity, like the Hoover Dam. I don't think I haven't seen a lot of movement in wave energy technology, but maybe this is it. If we could imagine what technology would come 50 years ago. Can I tell a funny story real quick, or are we running out of time here?
Go.
So I'm with my friend at my grandma's house in Florida one day, and we're like, describing like how much technology is, she's 90. And we're like 90, when she was, 20, 70 years ago, if you were to say, there was this little device you can hold in your hand, you'd see people and talk to them on the other side of the earth. You could look up anything you ever known, every single book ever was invented, right? It would sound like this space device, you'd never believe it. Here we are, iPhones. So what new technologies will emerge in the next 70 years? Who's to know? And, I'm talking to my friend about this, like, oh, what are we going to be like in 70 years? What's life going to be like in 70 years from now? What are we going to be like in 70 years? She looks me dead in the eye. She goes, what are we going to be like in 70 years? Drunk.
She would be the perfect guest on the show.
You want to tie it back to our intro? I think this is an awesome story, all kidding aside. I'm so excited by all these technologies that are coming out. Great story.
Well, you know what this reminds me of? Last week, we talked about the plastic eating boat, right? A big catamaran being deployed in the Pacific Ocean to suck up all that runaway plastic, right? Which is really killing our oceans and our marine wildlife. Here's another very similar solution where, a boat, barge, whatever that machine looking thing is being deployed to create a blowhole to create wave energy. And actually in my NYU program, I did a paper about river wave technology being used, because you could put little propellers on a riverbed and line a whole miles of riverbed. These are the solutions that different parts of the world can't have the same solution in order to create clean energy. And so an area like Tasmania, an island economy, these are great ideas that can really be sustainable. So again, we go back to innovation. This is on a small level. They're doing this in Denmark. They're creating a whole island of clean energy. That's like on a massive level. And we need everything. We need all of the above types of solutions. Not all of them are going to work. Going back to our very first story about Solyndra, they're not all going to work, but we need to take that risk right now while we still have the time to do it. And then we need to execute smartly. So I think it was another great story, and it kind of really tied into, I think, a lot of the themes for today. And the best part about Dana being a guest is we talked a lot about how we can finance these types of endeavors, and we can do it in a very transparent way. And we can give the average person access to that type of investing to finance these types of projects as time goes on. It's just really an ecosystem of winning for clean energy.
Yeah, and I wanted to just touch real quick since Dana brought it up, and we'll include this link. I did find the IMCA Group's website. It's imcagroup.org. They have a sustainable finance principles, guidelines, and handbooks section. So you can go here and get more details on the things that Dana talked about. We'll provide the link.
Fantastic. Dana, for more information about IHS, where should they go?
Feel free to contact me directly on LinkedIn, ihsmarkit.com. If you have a specific product area or service that you're interested in, I can help guide you to the right area. But guys, thanks for having me on this really fascinating discussion. Your podcast continues to cover so many topics, and this is just only going to be a growing area of interest. And congratulations on all your success.
Well, thank you. You're a great guest, and we hope to have you again in the future, maybe for a follow-up down the road about the progression of the green bond movement in the context of ESG. And, really happy to have you. Lucas, really quick, why don't we tell people where they can go to get more information?
You can find us on your favorite podcast site. We're on about a dozen podcast sites. So you search for Pirates of Clean Tech and you can click the follow or the subscribe button, and then you'll get notified when our new episodes post about once a week. And we're also on YouTube if you want to see us and see our guests and have a little bit more of an intimate experience with us. We're on YouTube. You search for Pirates of Clean Tech. You hit the subscribe button, and then we'll be in your subscribe list. So you'll get you'll see our videos right away. And also, if you want to be notified, you can click the alarm bell. Then you get a notification on your phone. That's what I like. That's what I do. So I like to be notified when our latest videos are up, because I don't know if you've seen this, but a lot of the things we talk about end up in the news stream a week or two later. So if you want to be first and you want to know all the best info on clean tech, you want to subscribe to us. So Eric, do you have some disclosures or disclaimers you want to talk about?
I do, but I feel like you're saying that we're influencers, which I've never been accused of being before. So really quickly, the views and opinions expressed by the Pirates of Clean Tech are those of us individually and not necessarily of any organization we are affiliated with. I think I said that all in one breath. Very happy. Dana, thank you again for being a great guest. And with that, I'm Eric Planey.
I'm Lucas Finko.
I'm Dana Villanova.
And we are the Pirates of Clean Tech. Yar!
Yar!